What do you make of these comments by Adam? And do you think that Charlotte will take any further steps and make a motion with the league, or is this like the last we'll hear of it, you think?
Yeah, well, just ultimately, I think when Shams put up the tweet last week, and this was the tweet according to Shams from ESPN, the Hornets have been in contact with the NBA as they explore options to dispute the Los Angeles Lakers' failed physical assessment of Mark Williams. Sources tell ESPN the Williams Dalton Connect trade was nixed on Saturday, and now Hornets weigh avenues to challenge. So I think some people read that as, maybe even including myself, as that it was just sort of only a matter of time before there was a formal protest or appeal that was brought from the franchise to the league. Full week goes by, none of that happens. It doesn't. What Adam Silver said yesterday doesn't necessarily conflict with what Sham said. I think a couple of things. One, I would agree with Adam Silver. The last thing he said, which is that, like, I think it's far more disruptive to the players who are a part of a trade that gets rescinded like this. And I can't imagine. I'm not sure I can think of someone that's had their career more disruptive. And we'll talk about this a little bit more throughout the pod, but whose career has been like exploded more like this than Mark Williams. Like, he's in the midst of a breakout season, after missing the first month or so of the year, missing basically all of last season. He thinks he's going to get to play with the Lakers, like the glamour franchise in the NBA. It's maybe some sad feelings too, moving on from the franchise that drafted you, the state that you played college in. He's from Virginia. He's an East Coast guy, but you thinking you're going to play with LeBron and Luka going forward. All this stuff happens, and then immediately you're just pushed back in the opposite direction. And it's not like it's not black and white either, right? Like, there's so much collateral damage that comes with this. So I would just say, like, first off, I feel really bad for all of the players involved, especially Mark Williams, but also Dalton Connect too. Like, this stinks. And it feels pretty unfair for these guys to be sort of like just the ones who are stuck in the gears of these $2 billion, operations that are just squaring off against one another here. I think the words that I would pull from the Silver quote that we just played there was when he says, quote, reduce uncertainty, that the league should be looking for ways to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. That I can't agree with more. I'm hoping this is the last time I see something like this, because it's pretty gross and it's pretty unfortunate. I am hopeful that the Hornets will continue to look into options for appealing this, or for protesting this. They're doing their due diligence as a franchise. But ultimately, like, if I'm thinking about this from like the players who are involved here, like, it's I don't this is not like good business, and it's also harmful to the actual players involved in the transaction. So I think I have in my notes that the league has a responsibility to reduce the possibility of this ever happening again, like, as much as possible. So whether that's, in terms of Adam Silver mentioned sports science, and sort of like coming up with a more standardized version of what it means to pass a physical, which is something I like. It's like a little hard to believe. I mean, it does seem like it's fairly subjective.
Uh-huh.
But is that something where the league needs to have like an agreed upon, you know, third party that's doing physicals, or does more information need to be exchanged in the initial sort of like electronic transfer that I think we've all probably have heard about in the last couple of weeks, that this sort of like initial sort of discovery phase that happens leading into once the trade's been like agreed upon but hasn't been formalized yet, where the teams are sharing medical information about the players. Like, it feels like, does that need to be, a part of me thinks like that maybe they'll need to be more forthcoming in that type of discovery. But I could also see teams wanting to be even more guarded with that information now, after sort of like what's happened here with with Mark Williams and the Hornets and the Lakers too. So I have kind of a lot of different thoughts about this, especially as it pertains to the Hornets and to Williams. But yes, the like ultimately it's on the league, it's on the Players Association. I would just say like I'd be curious to know what they've been doing behind the scenes because I haven't seen a lot. I haven't seen much sort of like public acknowledgement of like where the union has been. I mean, I'm sure they're supporting Mark Williams, of course they are, but I'd be curious to know sort of like what that effort looks like. The group that is should be actively supporting one of its own members. So I'd like more information about that. I don't know if I'm going to get it, but if and when the league is working towards improving this kind of situation, so they're mitigating the possibility of something that's happening again, the association has to be involved in that process too, obviously. I'd be curious to know just like a little bit more. Perhaps I've missed something. So yeah, I don't know. Richie, have you heard anything about the association in terms of like if they've had any sort of like public comments about this, or just I'd be curious to know where you are on what Silver said earlier this week, or I guess
Yeah, no,
last
I've
week
not
now.
heard, yeah, anything official. And this situation's so rare. Like, I just don't feel like it's going to present itself often. So it's probably something that they don't really think about that often. But the Hornets and the fans of Charlotte, Lakers were on the receiving end, but it feels like it affected the Hornets a little bit more.
Entirely.
Yeah,
It's not. I actually don't even think it's like close.
yeah, yeah,
I don't think it's even close in terms of like who got burnt worse here, which is what makes the a lot of the comments from like the Lakers media apparatus that have been sort of like been very critical of the Hornets in the front office and the organization for this. It feels really purple and gold tinted because the Hornets are carrying a lot more downside risk here
yeah.
if this trade was like unlikely to go through in the eyes of the Hornets, then it wouldn't be worth pursuing. You know what I mean? Um, so I know I wanted to toss that in there too.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously with the deadline passing, there's really not much the Hornets could do at this moment. I guess if they had done the trade a little bit earlier instead of waiting until February 6th, they could have adjusted the picks on the original trade. Like I would have been down for the Hornets, like maybe foregoing that 2031 first round pick and, maybe keeping the pick swap in there. I think
Mhm.
I would have been okay with that trade. But it did get me thinking, like you're saying, like some kind of third party must be involved and, with the physicians and the doctors of these individual teams, they're going to have different thresholds over what is worth a trade and what's not worth a trade. Because Mark Williams was clearly playing, but it seems like the Lakers saw something in the future that kind of came up and kind of gave them second thoughts about it. The Hornets are the ones that are going to have to deal with Mark Williams. And it feels like he's probably a little bit unhappy because of the fact that this trade failed because of a physical. The Hornets didn't necessarily want to keep him around. They wanted to, not get rid of him per se, but obviously there was an offer that came their way. But to your point, I do think there needs to be a third party involved. The Hornets, for example, when they were granted that disabled player exception from Grant Williams, which obviously I don't think they're going to use that before March 10th with all the stipulations that are involved. Like it was decided upon by a neutral physician and a neutral panel. And, the people came together and formed a consensus that were not involved with the Hornets. Now, maybe the results would have came back the same had there been a neutral panel for Mark Williams. But I think it does take out the motive for maybe the Lakers getting cold feet. I stated this in a previous episode, but I fall under the notion that Charlotte did not do anything wrong. They were not the ones that were like they didn't withhold information purposefully or anything of that nature. I do think that maybe the Lakers did back out because they had second thoughts. I do wonder too, like maybe another rule change, Brian. It could be where, okay, the trade clearly went down before the trade deadline. Is there any way, like within 48 hours, could they adjust the picks that were involved? That I don't know how that would even work. I know that, like I said, if they had done it earlier in the week, they could have made changes to the original trade if both parties were, agreed upon it. But that could be one little addendum that they could add. Like, okay, they agree upon the trade, failed physical. Can we adjust the picks?
I like that. There should be like because to me that seems like pretty turnkey of a solution too. Like, and again, it's unlikely that the scenario would even happen, you know?
Mhm.
And I suppose if you could say like if you put something like that into like the CBA or whatever, maybe it uh maybe teams look to take advantage of it somehow, some way, you know? So maybe you have to be kind of like careful if you're, baking in rules that could be, taken advantage of by a team who maybe does get cold feet, and then is using that to sort of like as a inefficiency to act in bad faith. Yeah, but I ultimately I like that suggestion. And it to me it kind of feels like I'm almost surprised that's not already a thing. You know what I mean? Like if a trade can be rescinded after the deadline, then why can't it be like
Adjust.
amended. Yeah, exactly. Like it feels like there should be um and again, I mean I'm sure the trade deadline's not picked at like a random date or whatever. And I'm sure there are things that are baked into it. I don't think it's like purely arbitrary, but I don't see why I've not at least I guess I should say I've not yet heard a reason why you couldn't have this like window of time to basically at least allow doesn't mean that the teams would have to, both teams
Right.
have to agree to it and they'd have to like negotiate, something like that. But I don't know why that would be like a bad thing per se to add in, especially if both teams have to like acquiesce to it, you know what I mean, for it to actually like take shape. But yeah, no, I like that as an idea.